lot of what we do is anchored on sustainability, but also anchored on people. Ultimately, everything we do and what we do so that people can have a better existence, right? And when you see the way that people are living, whether it's because they're surrounded by waste and getting ill, or because they don't have access to clean water or energy, and that limits their potential economically and whatnot, these are the things that we try to address at Optimal Greening. There are many entrepreneurs who have built things and have failed, and many, athletes and people who will tell you the reason I succeed is because I failed. And I never quite understood that until I took the step out, right? After 18 months of monitoring and evaluating the project, we saw an 81% reduction in waterborne diseases, right, in the community. So the impact is real on the lives of the people that we touch.
If you can put one belief about sustainability in Africa into every young founder's head, what would that be?
My favorite definition of sustainability is that sustainability is the possibility that all living things will flourish forever on this planet.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Diary of an African Entrepreneur. And today I'm going to be exploring a very interesting subject with a very special guest with me today. And I would like to welcome Osen Iyahen to the podcast. Welcome, Osen.
Thank you for having me, Deji. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm going to start on the very shallow end, and then we'll work our way into more deeper topics. But just to get to meet you, I know you emigrated to the US as a teenager, and you built most of your life and your career over there in the US. But in 2008, you decided to move back to Lagos because you wanted to start that journey, building out things in Lagos. What did coming back feel like for you, and what did you feel you had to leave behind when you were coming back to Lagos?
Well, I'll start with the second question first. I left behind family. So my husband and I and our two little kids at the time moved back in 2008. And my whole family was back in the US and still is, right? So parents, siblings, we all emigrated to the United States when I was a teenager, as you said. So that was challenging to leave family behind, but moving with my, now new family to Nigeria, the decision was made together with my husband, who also was keen to move back to Nigeria after being out of the country for over 2 decades at the time, studying and working in the US. And we basically said to ourselves, look, if we don't go back to Nigeria now, we're probably never going to go back to Nigeria. And at the time, a lot of good things were happening in the country, and we felt like we could contribute, our knowledge, our experiences, to help develop Nigeria and more broadly Africa.
Lagos is probably more like home for, especially the children now. Lagos is more like home for them.
It was a fantastic experience for them. I mean, they got to understand and really imbibe the culture. Everything from food to language to music. And so, being at home and having that sense of identity as a Nigerian, growing up in Nigeria amongst Nigerians, is something they would have missed out on if they were growing up in the US. But they're back in the US now. They've gone to school back in the US. And so it's just my husband and I still here in Nigeria at the moment.
That's interesting. I mean, the first time I heard about your kids, and maybe that brings me to the subject of how we connected. We went to the same business school, even though you went ahead of me before me. And I recall that the first time I spoke to you, you told me that you took your two boys to Singapore with you, then you hired a nanny. In my head, I was like, oh, wow. Moving with the kids is one, being able to hire a nanny, what was that experience like for you? Going to school with two kids, what did you have to sacrifice, or what changed about your ideology through that process of schooling with two kids in the mix?
I'll tell you, a lot of people thought I was crazy when I said I was moving to Singapore to go to business school and taking my two kids with me. It was challenging, but it was well worth it. My children were 5 and 3 at the time we left. INSEAD is a 1 year program, as you know. So by the time we came back, they were 6 and 4. I had to hire a Filipino nanny in Singapore because the Singaporeans would not give my Nigerian nanny a visa long term. They gave her a 1 month visa. So she went with us, but then helped me train the new Singaporean nanny that we hired. As you know, INSEAD is a very intense experience, whether it be academically, socially, and all of that. And whilst going through all of that, I was practically, by myself with the kids because my husband was in Nigeria. The kids had a fantastic experience. They went to an international school, met, children from all over the world, learned how to speak Mandarin, enjoyed all the, attractions in Singapore, and they loved being there. And it was challenging for me because I was balancing spending time with them and school and all these things. But the fact that I had a really good Filipino nanny was very good for me because I could rest assured while I was doing all these other things that they were well taken care of. And I recall when we were moving back finally, and because we did a lot of traveling actually in the region while we were there. We would go to Malaysia, we would go to all these places. And when we were coming back finally, and the kids were, buckling their seatbelts, they sort of, I think it dawned on them. They sort of looked at me and said, "So when are we coming back?" And I'm like, "We're not coming back." So we haven't been back to Singapore since then, and
Wow.
that was, I think, in 2012. So it's
Yeah.
been 14 years now. But they had a fantastic experience. Needless to say, they weren't too excited to leave.
Interesting. And one other thing I found quite fascinating is, which of course plays into your career, is you studied chemical engineering. I think that's one other connection point we have, even though I never worked for 1 day as a chemical engineer, but I still studied chemical engineering. But one of the things that I've seen the way your career has evolved is that you probably at some point figured out that engineering is not the hardest part of this work. And at what point did that realization hit you and what led to it?
So similar to you, I studied engineering, but I knew I didn't want to wear the hard hat and the overalls. Part of the reason why I studied engineering was because growing up in Nigeria, the engineering jobs were the best paid jobs, especially with the oil and gas industry. And that was my thinking. But once I got to the US and I was now studying chemical engineering, I quickly realized that there were a lot more opportunities and things that a chemical engineer could do. And so my first job, as an intern, actually, while still in college, was as an environmental engineer. And I worked for a company called Cargill in Kansas. And when I graduated, they asked me to come back, and I wanted to go back because I really enjoyed the job and the people. And so my first job out of college was as an environmental engineer working on energy, waste, and water issues. And that's really where sort of my journey with, sustainability and the environment started. And my career has taken me in different places and different roles, very diverse, working for since then, pharmaceutical company, Merck and Company, working for ExxonMobil, working for General Electric and the likes, mostly in the energy space, and within that energy space, also power. And over the years, as I've seen the transition to whether it be renewable because of climate change and all of these things, it sort of brought me back a little bit full circle to where I began my career as an environmental engineer. And just having that compass to say, these are the things that I want to work with, right? It's water, it's energy, it's waste management. And I think when I moved back to Nigeria, it became even more sort of pressing and in my face because the issues I was dealing with as an environmental engineer in the US were very different to the issues that I see and I was seeing here in Nigeria and across Africa. And so when I began to think about it through the lenses of sustainability, it became clear to me that I needed to sort of recontextualize how we were approaching sustainability here in these parts of the world, versus how it's approached in other sort of more developed regions.
Can you give me an example of one of those big differences you observed very quickly in how it's been managed in developed parts of the world versus Nigeria or other developing nations?
So I'll speak to energy first, and then I'll speak a little bit to waste management. So when I was working as an environmental engineer, I was taking care of seven factories basically, and reporting to the EPA on a number of things, including discharges to water bodies and things like
Sorry,
that.
what's the EPA? Just for the sake of those who are listening.
Sorry, it's the
Yeah.
Environmental Protection Agency in the US, the US
Yeah.
EPA. Yes. And on the energy side, obviously energy is widely available, but we were looking for how to, one, cut energy use by introducing energy efficiency into, equipment and that sort of thing, so that we're consuming less energy. Because less energy is less cost. And in today's world, less energy, less cost, less carbon emitted, right? The other thing we were doing was we were taking the waste out of some of these factories. A lot of that was biological waste, and we were putting them through anaerobic biodigesters to create biogas that we were using to then fuel the power generation. So that's what we're talking about today in terms of circular economy, right?
Yes.
Instead of just throwing the waste away and allowing it to generate methane and whatever and pollute the environment, how do we capture that methane? How do we burn it? How do we, use it to then power facilities? So those are the things we're working on in energy. And this was in 2001, right? I graduated in 2001. Um, and then on the emission side, I was reporting, like I said, to the EPA on things like fugitive emissions. So you have huge refrigeration systems, and every now and again things happen. So you might release some ammonia into the atmosphere, or maybe from your processes you have chemicals that come into the water bodies where you release wastewater, things like that. So you have to do calculations and figure out, okay, have you hit a threshold? And if you've reached that threshold, then you need to report and you need to say, why did you release this and what are the circumstances around that and that sort of thing. So we were protecting the environment basically. But then, you come back home here to Nigeria. I know there are industrials here, but I don't know that they report when they release, or if they release any of these things, right, into the environment. We know what's happening in the Niger Delta with the oil companies. We can see that people have lost their livelihoods, fishermen and women, and that they're going through severe health challenges because the environment has been polluted. And then you just look at your environment, step out of your home. I mean, we're here now, and in Lagos, it's been like 10 days of nonstop rains, and you can see the flooding that's happening. And a component of that issue is drainages. Drainages are clogged with plastic, with all of these things, because we don't know how to manage waste. We don't manage waste properly, and people just toss their waste in the streets, and it ends up in the drains or in the canals and clogs everywhere. So when I looked at these issues, they were very basic. And I said, I have an interest and a passion for protecting the environment. And I started off my career with, doing this stuff around energy, waste management, and water. We, in the US as well, I didn't talk about water, but in the US as well, with the company I was working for, we were doing a lot of wastewater treatment. Here, I don't know that we treat wastewater. I think a lot of people, even out of homes, discharge, and even estates or whatever, and even people or organizations that pick up sewage or waste. I don't know that they treat that waste. I think that some of it ends up in the lagoon, and it's not news to a lot of us that some of these things are discharged into the lagoon, which is causing pollution also. So yeah, these are the things that were very different to me, doing that work in the US and coming here and saying, look, we have some very basic issues that need to be addressed.
Yeah. Between that time and now, have you seen any evolution in how things are being done in Nigeria, or is it still the same the same standards that are there?
It's difficult for me to say, to be honest. I'm sure that there are people working on it, but from when I moved back in these issues, I was not sensitized to when I was growing up in Nigeria, but you knew that there were issues.
Yeah.
Became more sensitized to it when I was working in the environmental space. And since I moved back in 2008 until I started optimal greening in 2020, I didn't see much progress. And, even with optimal greening, we are one in very few number of organizations that are really focused on sustainability, the environment. And, progress has to be made, but I say that it takes, more people who are not just sensitized, but actually taking action, whether at the individual level, at the organizational level, and at the federal government level. But I know we'll talk about optimal greening, but a lot of what we do is anchored on sustainability, but also anchored on people. Because again, that's one of the things that, pushed me into setting up this organization is ultimately everything we do and what we do so that people can have a better existence, right? And when you see the way that people are living, whether it's because they're surrounded by waste and getting ill, or because they don't have access to clean water or energy, and that limits their potential economically and whatnot, these are the things that we try to address at Optimal Greening through the lenses of sustainability, but putting human beings at the center of it. So it's a human-centric approach.
Yeah, thanks. And maybe that's a good segue now for us to start getting into, how you've how what you're doing has evolved to where you are today. So one particular subject that caught my attention was the the Agala project. I hope I got that name correctly. And as an operator, with that project, I wanted to give your perspective from that lens. You put in a borehole, you installed solar system, biodigester. You talked about people. I think you hired and onboarded people. And given the challenges you face, what part of that is still running today? And what have you watched break in projects like this over the years?
So that was our pilot project, our very first project. And we really took the time to design not just the infrastructure piece, but also the community engagement piece. Because on the one hand, we get grants and we deploy the projects, but we anchor the post commissioning and the sustainability in the long term in terms of operations and maintenance on the community. So we are not the one managing the facilities on a day to day basis. And so in Agala, what we designed was we drilled an industrial borehole. Actually, initially we had drilled a borehole that was not industrial. It was only up to 60 meters. And what we found was that the water in that area was highly saline. And again, that's because of climate change. There's a lot of salinity now in groundwater. And so we had to get a drilling rig into the island and dig much deeper to about 200 meters. Then we installed a water treatment facility to process the water so that it could be potable. And then we built a sanitation facility. In that community, there was no sanitation facility. People were doing their business out by the waterside because it's an island community. So they had no clean water, no sanitation, no electricity. So they're not connected to the national grid. And so we had to deploy a solar system to power all of these facilities. And that was the first time that the community actually had light within the community. So they had the sanitation facility, which has toilets, shower stations, and hand washing stations. And then because we realized that we couldn't do a soakaway, because how would you evacuate the waste from the soakaway from an island community? That was a challenge. And that's why we introduced the biodigester to treat the waste and then produce biogas. So all of these facilities were built, but alongside that, we were building the capacity of community members. So we went in there and we helped the community, first of all, establish a community development association, which is basically the system of local governance and community governance recognized by the Lagos state government. So under the local government authority, they are now a registered organization. And with that, they were able to open a bank account. And then following that, we instituted and created a WASH committee. So WASH stands for Water, Sanitation and Hygiene. So we found relevant members of the community who could take on several roles within that WASH committee, whether it's, the secretary, the public relations person, the chairman, and these kinds of things, right? And then we also constituted what we call a facilities management team. So this consisted of an agent who collects money for the water, a cleaner who cleans the toilet facilities, a plumber, an electrician, people who can respond when things have gone wrong so that they can quickly resolve them and get this operations back up and running. And so these teams we trained, we took them through several trainings, everything from financial management and budgeting to technical support from the technical partners who build some of the infrastructure, to sustainability and just how to run the operations on a day-to-day basis. And those teams are still in place today. They are still operating. Are there challenges? Yes, I think a lot of the challenges are really around, the current situation that we see in the economy, where you have a fee that you have to pay because that's how they take care of the facilities. You have a fee that you have to pay. And most people at the time we built the facility were able to pay the fees and were paying the fees. But obviously with the situation in the economy, some people are now maybe not as able to pay. So you might see a dip in revenues, that sort of thing. On the infrastructure side, we haven't seen much issues. I think the one main issue we had was with one of the inverters that was in the community, but it was still under warranty and that was taken care of by the OEM. So that has been sorted. And they continue to operate. And we've done several projects since then, including one we just commissioned in April here in Ikorodu, Project Swift. And that one is serving now 9,000 direct beneficiaries and operating similar to Agala with the same structure in terms of the facilities management, the WASH committee, and the community development association. So that's the model that we've employed, and we're learning from it. It's not perfect, let's be honest. When you're dealing with human beings, there'll always be things that you can learn and improve upon. And so we are taking the learnings from each project and enhancing the model and taking those lessons into the next projects as we scale up the solution.
Seems like a complete ecosystem that you built. And from what I hear, it looks like if some part of that ecosystem was not set up as part of what was installed, it most likely will fall apart somewhere. So you really have to make sure that, for example, you have the plumbers, you have the electrician all built into that model, and all of them are still functioning today. The question for me is the sustainability of this, because what I understand is that this is donor funded, right? Is there a way where this can become financially sustainable on its own without donor funds?
So the donor is funding the infrastructure development. So the monies that we use to drill the borehole, to build the sanitation facility, buy the solar systems, post implementation, the sustainability, like I said, is anchored on the community. And that means that it is the sales of the water that is being treated and produced, that the monies from the sales that is used to maintain and operate those facilities. We're still in early days. Our first project was commissioned in 2023. So far, that's working out. Where we see a potential challenge as we go along, because these revenues can take care of your consumables, if it's chlorine for the water treatment or whatever. With the solar, you don't have really a lot of operational expenses for the energy. Where we foresee that they will need support, and this is where we continue to build our relationship with the local and state government, is 10, 15 years down the line, when things like your solar panels or inverters are coming to end of life, right? The community may not be able to, at that time, have raised enough. They have enough now for their monthly operations, and then some that they keep away as a reserve. And the idea is that that reserve should be able to go towards some of the bigger, long lifespan items. But we know that when they get there, probably they will not have enough, or they will need support. Yeah. And so that's where we continue to build the relationship with the state and local government authorities. When we were commissioning our project in Ikorodu in April, the Project Swift that I just talked about, we did get commitment from the local government that they would support the communities to continue to sustain these things. And they have already started doing things on top of what we did to do that. So I think that we will continue to work with government because they are an integral part. Keep in mind, provision of water is really a government mandate, right? What we are doing is we are plugging a gap because we see a gap that is huge and big. When you ask me, what is the market? The last report that was done on water and sanitation in Nigeria shows that only 10% of the Nigerian population have access to all three components, which is water, sanitation, and hygiene, right? So if you have 90% of the population that don't have access to all three, that's a problem. And that's a big gap. And that's where we are trying to plug the gap. So we are already working with the Lagos state government, particularly the Ministry of Environment and Water Resources, as well as the local governments in which we operate. And they have been most supportive. In fact, the Lagos State Ministry of Environment and Water Resources are the ones who sort of guide us in where we go next to pre-qualify communities because they know where the need is and they've already touched and looked at these communities. So they say to us, okay, here's where you need to go next. They were the ones who took us to Ikorodu. Now that we've completed Ikorodu, we are in Ekpe. They were the ones who showed us the communities in Ekpe. And we'll continue to work with them together with the local government authorities to ensure that these things are sustained in the long term.
What kind of donors do you approach for the projects you do?
So this is a very interesting question. When we first started and when we were looking to fund our Agala pilot, we were very focused on local corporations, whether it be, global or truly indigenous, but operating locally. And we reached out to several and they all liked the project, but for whatever reason, they were not putting their money where their mouth was. And we spent a lot of time doing that. And at some point, we just sort of woke up and said, okay, if it's not working, we need to sort of look out. And then we went to crowdfunding. So that's how we started funding for the Agala project initially. We started with crowdfunding. And once we had raised about $20,000 on the internet from crowdfunding, we then started building the sanitation facility. And it was on the back of that we then started writing grant applications. And so if you look at our granting landscape today, I would say 98% of the funds we've received have been from outside Nigeria, which is a shame, right? Because we know that there's a lot of money here in Nigeria.
Yeah.
And you would think that a lot of the organizations here would be interested in solving the problems here at home. But we've been most fortunate. Agala pilot project was funded by EDP, which is the Portuguese energy company, through their access to energy grant that they put out every year. And that accounted for about 75% of the infrastructure spend. One local organization that contributed to that was Olon. So Olon also basically took on the solar component of that project. And we're grateful to them for that. But since then, we've gone on to raise grants from the Grundfos Foundation, which is a water technologies foundation out of Denmark. In fact, they contributed to the Agala project as well, a smaller amount, but they were the main contributor to Project Swift after USAID pulled out. So Project Swift in Ikorodu was initially funded by USAID. And 6 months into the project, obviously, we know what happened. USAID was basically dissolved. And so the Grundfos Foundation stepped in and took on basically the entire scope of the water technologies and water infrastructure piece of that project. Since then, we've also gotten funding from the Baker Hughes Foundation out of the US, energy company again, and they are the ones supporting our project that we just started in Ekpe. We've also gotten contributions from high net worth individuals who, really see the value in the work that we do, and it resonates with them, and they want to see us continue to have the impact that we do. But we're at a point now where, you know, we really want to tap into the local market. I don't know how we do that, but again, to your question, it's basically mostly international grants that we've been receiving.
If you have a magic wand to unlock certain donations, where would those donations be coming from?
Um, I would like to see donations from local high net worth individuals and foundations. Um, Local, because when we look at the grants that we've received, a lot of them are from corporates and foundations, whether corporate foundations or family foundations. Um, and I believe that we have the capacity here locally to be able to do that. But in addition to that, I think we would also like to see government granting, particularly for something as basic as water and sanitation. I mentioned earlier that we are in partnership with the Lagos state government and local government authorities. They partner with us on a number of things, but we have not received any government funding at all. So we would like to see some government funding, both locally and internationally. USAID was the first international government funding that we received, and we really thought that we were going to scale with them because they were having like a 5-year program, and we were already on the second year application, getting ready for the next tranche when this thing happened. So if we could get funding from other governments besides the United States as well, that would be really good. But beyond those two, I don't know. We're open. We're really open. Maybe I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. Maybe development institutions as well. I don't know that they fund small or local NGOs, but it would be good to be on that radar as well.
Yeah, I mean that's important to mention. Maybe somebody listening to this would be able to unlock some of those opportunities because I really think the work you're doing is really really valuable. Some of the things you mentioned about the kind of people that were impacted by the project, the Agala project in particular, was quite inspiring. These are people that would never have thought they would get those kind of opportunities. So I'm really rooting for you on this one. I want to talk a little bit about your experience with your leadership experience. And I think this is very pivotal because you transitioned from the comfort and the safety net of a multinational to grinding it out. For those who don't know, you went through the GE's leadership program, which is a very highly selective program, the ECLP program. You were corporate leadership staff. You led the post integration acquisition integration as well at GE for power services, and now you are at Optimal Greening. You are grinding it out, raising donations from donors, trying to build, legs on it. What is the most challenging part about leaving the corporate and jumping into entrepreneurship?
I think it's what you said. It's leaving the comfort zone and going out into the unknown. It's scary. It takes a lot of courage. Um, but I think that that's where growth happens, right? And there are many entrepreneurs who have built things and have failed. And many, athletes and people who will tell you the reason I succeed is because I failed. And I never quite understood that until I took the step out, right? It's easy to be in the comfort zone and to just keep sort of, moving along, getting the paycheck and that sort of thing. But I truly believe that each and every one of us has that something that keeps calling at you, nagging at you, like, okay, why don't you try this? Why don't you do that? And we get so comfortable, with what we're doing that we really either don't pay attention to it or we don't listen intently enough that we say, okay, let me take a step in that direction. And I think what happened for me was when I was in GE, I was working the power side of the business. I started to see that shift again in the power sector and in the energy sector, where here in Africa we're still, burning diesel, burning gas, burning heavy oil. for power generation. And I was seeing the growth in solar, wind, and all of these renewable sources of energy across the globe. And I kept thinking to myself, and it kept nagging at me, what's going on everywhere else and why is it not going on here? Right. And that got me into sort of a mode in research. And I started doing a lot of researching. And that's how I stumbled across the sustainability program that I ended up going back to school for. So I got a master's in sustainability from Harvard. And it was literally within the first term or semester of being enrolled in that program that I made the decision that I was going to step out and that I was going to set up optimal greening. I started the program in 2019, started sort of brainstorming around what this organization would look like around that time. And by January 2020, optimal greening was a thing. We were registered. The foundation was registered in September 2020, and yeah, I just said to myself, I looked around to be sure. I looked around and said, I know what I want to do. I know where the space that I want to operate, but I couldn't find an organization that was doing it, and I couldn't find people who what I was feeling and sharing was there weren't a lot of people who it resonated with. In fact, when I decided to set up optimal greening, a number of people said to me, "What's that? Sustainability, right? Like, why would you leave GE and go set up this sustainability thing?" So a lot of people didn't get it. But I think, again, to your point, you have to step out and you have to say, this is what I feel, this is where I think I need to go. And if you can't find someone who you can attach to that's already doing it, then you have to be bold enough to set it up yourself and see where it takes you. And 6 years on, the journey has been fantastic. You know, we've built a very solid team. We've built a strong board of trustees and a strong advisory board. We've demonstrated that we can raise funds for the work that we do because it is important work and it is really changing the quality of lives of people who are in the communities that we've deployed these projects and continue to deploy these projects in. Everything from health in Agala, after 18 months of monitoring and evaluating the project, we saw that 81%, we saw an 81% reduction in waterborne diseases, right, in the community. This is everything from cholera to typhoid to skin rashes. Women now have more time to be productive outside the home. 45% increase in productivity for the women. Girls able to go to school, whereas before they were spending all their time going around looking for water. So the impact is real on the lives of the people that we touch. We're already gathering stories from Ikorodu and, you know, we're sharing them on social media. You know, there's a lady who was on the other day on our social media feed in Ikorodu saying, I'm a hairdresser. I relax women's hair. You know, I spend hours running around looking for water to do my job. But now I have this facility and do more work, right? And that's more revenue. And that's, you know, economic empowerment.
Yeah.
So, you know, these are the stories and these are the things that we see when we do this project that gives us the conviction that we are on the right path. And so, yeah, this is how I got to where I am.
Quite interesting. Very, 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 very interesting. Did you feel any sense of conflict at any point? 2008 was when you kind of you realized something had to be done. 12 years later, you started optimal greening. But during those period, you know, you built your career, ExxonMobil, GE. Was there any conflict at any point during this process, and how did you manage that?
I wouldn't say that there was a conflict. You know, when I finished my master's degree, the one in sustainability, um, I put out a post on LinkedIn and I said throughout, and we're all, you know, socialized to, you know, what makes a good career, right? So throughout my career, it's been about, you know, go to good schools, um, study a solid course, right? Hence, we study chemical engineering because you know you're going to get paid, whatever. Go work for the best companies, right? This is the conditioning that we have. And so throughout my career, that's what I was doing. Okay, you go work for ExxonMobil. They're one of the best in the field. You go work for GE. But at some point, you sit back, at least I can speak for myself, um, and you say, what problem do I want to solve?
Yeah.
Right? That's really the question. What problem do I want to solve, and how can I leverage my background, my experiences, my knowledge, um, to solve problems that have a real impact on people's lives? And I think when we live in this part of the world, the problems face you every day. And so you can't really, I mean, when you're living in the West, not to say that you can't solve problems, but things are comfortable to a certain extent. And so you may not be seeing the problems evidently. You have to maybe go out and seek and say, how do I solve this? Or maybe you've been touched by an issue, and so it's relevant to you. But when you live where we live, the issues are staring you in the face every day. And it's like, okay, let me go solve a problem, and that's what I decided to do. So I did the whole corporate thing because that's what society expected us to do. But I got to a point where I looked internally and I said, I have skills, I have knowledge, I have interests that lie in places where problems can be solved. And how do I then take those things and apply them to solve the problems?
What type of leader are you?
This is an interesting question. I think maybe the people who work for me are best placed to answer the question, but I'll try to recall some of the things they've said to me over the years. I'm a visionary leader, right? One of my favorite quotes is from the Stephen Covey 7 Habits. Begin with the end in mind. I typically will not set my foot on a certain path unless I know exactly where I want to go, right? And where I want to end up. So, and related to that is clarity. I often have a very clear sense of what it is and why I'm doing it. I typically would not be doing anything. And that's one of the things I always ask my team, and they know. I say, why are you doing this? Like, that has to be answered first before you even jump in and start doing it. I want to believe, and I get the feedback also, that I'm an authentic leader. And what I mean by that is I show up as I am, right? And again, in life, we just have to be somewhat vulnerable. I think that a lot of times we wear this armor, right? We want to show up a certain way. But over the years, I've come to realize that it's a lot of work, mental, emotional, and it saps from your energy. I feel, and I've experienced, that my energy is renewed and refreshed when I'm just myself. I'm not trying to be someone else or act in a way that an environment thinks I should act, right? And so I show up authentically. I have the conversations in a very true and honest fashion. And one of the things I got told a lot in corporate was, and I know in corporate, a lot of people tend to manage up, right? One of the things I often got told in corporate was I relate exactly the same way as I relate to the CEO, as I relate to the person at the bottom of the ladder, right? Because I look at people as human beings. I don't look at them as titles, because titles come and go, right? Titles come and go. But if I see you, I see you for who you are. And for me, that's more important than anything else. And so I think authenticity is another piece of it for me. Beyond that, I would have to say, maybe because I grew up in corporate as a leader, performance is important to me, right? I think that a lot of people who've come to work for me within the NGO space here have been very surprised at the rigor that I demand of them in this team. Because I've worked, like you said, in commercial excellence, operational excellence, and so there's no fat. We have to show up and we have to just get the job done efficiently, right? So I think that's been a bit of a tension for me coming from the corporate space into the NGO space, where you have people who've been working in nonprofits where you just sort of coasting, and I'm like, no, that's not here. We perform here. So that's another aspect of my leadership that is very important. Um, I think those three probably are the top three I can speak to at the moment.
Brilliant. So thinking about an operator, somebody who was an operator like you in your past years, sitting inside a bank or an oil and gas firm or somewhere out there, thinking about building his or her own thing, what would you say your corporate life, from your corporate life, what would you say they should keep, and what would you say they should discard?
I would say for sure keep the skills that you've acquired. Um, One of the things that has helped me from my corporate life also is just understanding how organizations work in terms of systems, processes, right? Bringing some of that in and leveraging that. Um, but at the end of the day, really, you have to sit with your core and ask yourself, again, the why question. Why is it that I want to do this, that I'm stepping out to do? And if you understand that, then you know the elements within which you are operating that you can leverage to do that work. So for me, for example, um, taking elements from my experience as an environmental engineer. When I was setting up Optimal Greening, the nonprofit, I could have done so many different things, like, in education or whatever is, today's fancy. But I said to myself, I need to leverage the areas that I have, experience, that I have gained knowledge and skills, and the things that are interesting for me. So again, water, energy, and waste. And that's why I decided to focus on those three things with optimal greening. When we go out into the field, the number of communities will tell you, oh, we have XYZ, so many more problems. And we just try to stay focused. So I would encourage anyone who's trying to step out to lean towards your strengths, where you have those skill sets, build on whatever you've learned and taken out of the benefits of working in large organizations. And I was, very lucky to work in some very, very well structured, good organizations, and taking some of those things with me to build at Optimal Greening. And then introducing elements of your own self, right? Like the culture that I build here at Optimal Greening is very true to who I am, my core values, right? Sustainability, integrity, innovation. These things are important to me. So it's like taking the best of both worlds, taking the best from that world, and then introducing the new, the you, and building culture around that.
Thanks, Osen. Tying things together now. If you can put one belief about sustainability in Africa into every young founder's head, something you only learned, because maybe you missed something at some point in your career, what would that be?
So again, when we use the word sustainability, it means different things to different people, or corporations. So I struggle a little bit with that question, because you can ask that question to 10 different people and they take something different away from it. Um, I don't like to define sustainability in the technical terms that it is defined in, which is, people, economy, and profits, people, and planet, right? It's a good technical definition. My favorite definition, and I forget the person who, this is a quote from someone, I forget the person who said this, but my favorite definition of sustainability is that sustainability is the possibility that all living things, whether humans, plants, whatever, will flourish forever on this planet. And the reason I like that definition is because it talks about living things, right? Of which we are part as human beings, right? The environment, the planet in which we inhabit, right? Because that's what sustains us, right? And then it talks about thriving. So we're not just existing, but we're actually thriving. Whether it's the fish in the ocean that is not being disrupted because plastics are all over there, or whether it's the people that we serve because now they have clean water and can live healthier lives. So, my advice or my comments to anyone who is thinking about sustainability and incorporating sustainability for the future is to think about how is this helping human beings or living things to flourish on this planet. And when you ask yourself that question, truthfully, a lot of the activities that we see, especially around corporates, you would take a step back and see that perhaps you're not contributing to that. Perhaps it's actually the opposite. But this is the challenge that we face, right? Because we live in a world still that is focused on money and profits. And not to say that that's not good. That's good. But it can't be at the expense of people and planet. And again, going back to that technical definition then. So how do we then put that at the center, that being sustainability, so that we are not destroying the planet or looking at people who cannot literally access clean water and sanitation to live a decent life, talk less of thriving, and think that we are doing well. That's not doing well. So that would be my 2 cents on that.
That's a very, it's a very, will I say, emotional place to top it up. And I think I like that because I've never heard it said like that before. And it's quite interesting because when you put it that way, it's a way you can reflect as an individual and truly ask yourself if you are playing your own role in driving sustainability in whatever way that means to you and to the world around you. So thank you very much, Osen. This has really been, it's one of the different podcasts I've done, in a world where many people are not so familiar, but I hope that, this will also begin to open up people's mind to what is possible. So thank you very much for joining this podcast.
You are most welcome, and it's my absolute pleasure. Thank you, Deji.
Thanks. If you found this very helpful or useful, please do subscribe to the channel, share with other people that you think will find it very helpful, and be sure to watch out for our next episodes. You can also go to the channel just to look for other videos on different topics with different other guests that have been on the show, and hope to see you next time. Thank you.